over the past couple of days, a bunch of Lightning Overdrive cards got leaked from the OCG. There are some really cool new retrains of older cards. We have a new Book of Moon, we have a new Guardian Sphinx, and there's even a card that works with Snake Rain, which I know we've all been waiting for quite a while. In today's video, I want to talk about some of my favorite cards from Lightning Overdrive so far. We won't see these in the TCG for a little while, but I do want to talk about them still because these cards could be pretty good when they make their way into the TCG. I also want to mention real quick here, if you are watching this on Sunday, that tomorrow at 11 a.m. I have a new video coming out that, trust me, you will not want to miss. That is a little bit earlier than I normally upload, so just make sure you're watching your subscription feed tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Anyway, the first card in today's video is Book of Lunar Eclipse. I love Book of Moon. It's been an iconic spell for a very long time, and it's currently pretty good actually. We see people using it in Zodiac a lot, and this is a new version of it that is very similar to how Twin Twisters was an upgraded version of MST. So Book of Lunar Eclipse is a quick play spell, of course, that says discard one card, then target two face-up monsters on the field, change them to face-down defense position. So you can see here it is very similar, like I said, to MST and Twin Twisters. This has a discard cost, but it can target two face-up monsters on the field instead of just one. One key difference here that I think might be this card's biggest downside, even if it doesn't seem like that, is that you have to target two face-up monsters. You cannot target up to two, which means you have to always have at least two face-up monsters you want to Book of Moon to use Book of Lunar Eclipse. Even though it might not come up that often, you might sometimes want to only Book of Moon one monster. Let's say your opponent normal summons a monster and you're trying to stop the combo before it happens. Well, do you really want to also Book of Moon your own monster if you have one? Because that's what it's going to take to flip an opponent's monster face down. If they only have one monster, you're going to have to flip one of your own face down as well. As you can probably imagine, the best case scenario for Book of Lunar Eclipse is when your opponent summons two monsters that they're trying to consolidate into a Synchro Summon or a C Summon or Link Summon. When you can flip those two monsters face down with just this card and any random card in your hand for discarding, that is a pretty insane play, and your opponent is probably going to have a hard time dealing with it. Don't get me wrong, I think this card is great, I just don't think the card is perfect, but I do think it will see experimentation and likely it'll see competitive play as well. We saw Twin Twisters being a huge deal when it was added into Yu-Gi-Oh!, and this could be a Twin Twisters 2.0, but this time it's for Book of Moon, not MST. The original Guardian Sphinx was released all the way back in 2003 in Pharaonic Guardian, and now we have a new version of the card, an upgraded form, and this is really cool to see. Pharaonic Guardian Sphinx is a level 8 Earth rock monster with 2300 attack and 3000 defense. And I don't know about you guys, but the original Guardian Sphinx was like the king of recess Yu-Gi-Oh!, at least at my school. That card was so hard to play around, and this one is actually a much better version of that original card because it packs a couple cool new effects. This thing says once per turn you can change this card to face down defense position. Obviously you would expect that on this type of card. You can only use each of the following effects of Pharaonic Guardian Sphinx once per turn. If this card is flip summoned, shuffle all monsters your opponent controls into the deck. If this card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special summon one level 5 rock monster from your hand or deck and face down defense position. Shuffling your opponent's monsters into the deck is way better than bouncing them back to the hand. Obviously, if you bounce them back to the hand, they can just reuse them later on in that turn or the next turn. This, though, is a much more permanent way of getting rid of those monsters, and it could be a pretty random board wipe that your opponent is not prepared for. You do still have to actually flip summon the card, unlike some other flip effects that are similar to this one. This one won't trigger if your opponent just attacks into it, just like the old Guardian Sphinx didn't trigger if your opponent attacked into it. But this one does have that last effect, which I think is very cool. So if your opponent knows you're playing this card and they just try to run it over in battle, which by the way isn't super easy, it does have 3000 defense, which is a pretty significant amount, but obviously there are cards with more attack than that. So let's say your opponent runs it over in battle. Well, now you can just special summon a level 5 rock monster from your hand or deck in face down defense position, which usually will be the actual original original Guardian Sphinx. This is a really cool retrain. I like how it makes you want to play the original, not only this newer version. I know sometimes with retrains we don't always see that. Sometimes you only see the retrain getting talked about, but it's cool how they incorporate the original in this card's effect as well. So not only does your opponent have to run over this monster with 3000 defense, they'll also have to get around the original Guardian Sphinx, which has 2400 defense, which is also a pretty big number. The thing with this new card though is that, yeah, it's pretty slow. It's kind of tough to actually get this card on the board, and if you are special summoning it and then flipping it face down, your opponent is going to know you have this. They're going to try to play around it in some way. That being said, it is still cool to see this upgraded form of a very old school card, so I like that Konami is doing this in Lightning Overdrive. They've actually been doing a lot of retrains lately, which is really nice to see. Next up, we have a new Fairy Earth monster, and I wanted to talk about this card primarily to focus on that Konami seems to really want to push Fairy Earth monsters right now. I don't really know why, but we recently got that Zolga retrain. Well, it's only out in the OCG right now, but that card was revealed a little while ago. We got it in the Prismatic God box, and this is yet another card that deals with Earth Fairy monsters. This is called Carbon. I'm not going to try to pronounce the first part of this card's name, and it's a level 4 Earth Fairy with 1200 attack and 1200 defense. It says you can tribute this normal summoned or set card, add one Earth Fairy monster from your deck to your hand, except Carbon, this card. If a face-up fairy monster or monsters you control is sent to the graveyard while this card is in your graveyard, you can place this card on the top of your deck. You can only use one Carbon effect per turn and only once that turn. So the idea here is that you can continuously search whatever Earth Fairies you want. We've already talked about some of the better Earth Fairies when we talked about the Zolga card. You have a lot of the Fluffle cards, you have a lot of the Madolche cards, so maybe someday we'll see a deck that uses Carbon and Zolga and maybe one of those archetypes that I just mentioned. This card might not seem that impressive right now, especially because you have to normal summon it to get the search, but it would be a card that you should keep your eye on, because whenever we get an Earth Fairy monster, which obviously Konami has printed a lot of those already, we now know that we have a clear way to search it really easily. Carbon might not be played right away, but I think in the future this card could be pretty decent. Speaking of cards that probably won't be good on release but could be good in the future, we have a new Snake Rain target. So if you don't know, Snake Rain is an older normal spell, and it's a card that people always talk about potentially being broken in the future, and this is yet another card that works very well with it. So Snake Rain discards a card to send 4 reptiles from your deck to the graveyard, and this is a reptile with a graveyard effect, which might not seem super crazy, but there are very few reptiles that are worth sending with Snake Rain at this moment, so anytime we get a new one that actually wants to be in the graveyard and has a decent effect, players get pretty excited. Once again, I cannot pronounce this card at all. I'll just call it Yamo, I guess. It's a level 2 water reptile with 0 attack and 0 defense. It says you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one reptile monster you control and one face-up monster your opponent controls, activate one of these effects. Change them to face down defense position or destroy that monster you control, and if you do, change that opponent's monster's attack to 0 until the end of this turn. So that second ability could be used with some of the reptilian cards. That could be kind of cool, and the Book of Moon effect is kind of decent. It would probably mostly just be used to force a negation on your opponent's side of the field, because if you Book of Moon it, obviously they can't use its abilities anymore, so they would be forced to negate this card in the graveyard. That being said, while this card might not seem that crazy right now, it is another card that we are looking at that could be used in the future with Snake Rain, and that is pretty exciting. If you have not been following Snake Rain for years, maybe you don't care as much about this card, but as someone that has wanted Snake Rain to be good in a deck, this card is pretty darn cool. Finally, we have Dark Eye Nightmare, a level 4 Dark Fiend monster with 1700 attack and defense. This card is pretty cool, so it wants to be played in a deck with a lot of trap cards, as you'll see in a moment here, but that deck also has to not care about its normal summon that much, because this likely would be your normal summon. Once per turn, if this card would be destroyed by battle, you can banish one trap from your graveyard instead, so that gives it a little bit more staying power, which is pretty cool, but more importantly, you can banish up to 3 traps from your graveyard, apply this effect depending on the number you banished. So if you banish 1, you get to draw 1 card, then place 1 card from your hand on top of your deck. That one's not super impressive, but if you banish 2, you just draw 1 card with no drawback. And if you banish 3, you get to draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card. So sort of like a mini Graceful Charity. You can only use this effect of Dark Eye Nightmare once per turn. This card appeals to me a lot as someone that obviously has played a lot of decks with trap cards. I don't think it's a card that will go into every single trap deck. Obviously, you wouldn't really want to play it in like Altergeist or Guru, maybe not even Eldritch at this point because they actually want their traps in the graveyard, but in a trap deck that doesn't really care about its normal summon, this card seems very, very powerful. Maybe you play it in like Frog Paleozoics as a late game card. You don't really want to banish your Paleos, but that deck plays plenty of other traps that you don't mind banishing, and that deck doesn't always have a lot of normal summons. Swap Frog is obviously your big one, but besides that, you're just setting Dupe Frog or Ronin Totem and passing anyway, so why not normal summon this card and actually get some value and potentially draw into your better cards, maybe even Swap Frog. So Dark Eye Nightmare could be played in a lot of decks. I'm not sure if it has a real good deck to go on right now, but it is a card I'm interested in trying out in a variety of strategies. Anyway, that is all for today's video. Don't forget to check out the channel at 11 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow because I'm going to have a pretty exciting video for you guys to watch, and I hope you guys really enjoy it. I'll see you later though. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.